Uh, that's okay.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah.
He just put up that thing that is being recorded.
Oh,
He's
okay.
there. He's there.
What's up? Do you need to go outside? Red teeth?
Well, welcome, John. Thank you for coming to KTBC to teach. And I would do an introduction, but I think everybody already knows. I don't think you need any introduction.
Okay.
And but we're really pleased that you're here and that you're gonna talk with us.
Well, was very happy to have received this invitation, and very happy and very pleased to see so many people from different places coming together. And there was a few technical issues, so that's why we started a bit late. And there was also kind of some scheduling questions, but now we seem to be all together, and I'm very happy to see you and to have a chance to spend some time with you. This session, as you all know, is focusing on a set of teachings known as the Dhammapada. And I know from remarks that were made before we officially started that there are some people here, such as Yolanda, who is very familiar with this text, who likes it a lot, but I'm sure there's others here who maybe don't know it at all. So I don't want to get into an academic or historical discussion of this work to any extent, partly because I don't have that background, that type of background for this. But I did want to say a few words to orient ourselves to this this teaching. So the Dhammapada is actually an anthology. It's a collection of comments, verses that the Buddha spoke as they've been preserved in the Pali canon. Now, the same set of teachings, when they were preserved in the Sanskrit canon, was called the Dhammapada. It's only the letter R that's different in this case between the Pali and the Sanskrit. You have Dhammapada or Dharmapada, but they're referring to the same collection of teachings. And in this collection, there are 383 different verses, separate verses, spread over 26 so-called chapters. So that averages to about 15 verses for each chapter. But even though these are called chapters, it's not like the chapters in a book where there's a particular story being told over time, or like other kind of sections that you can divide that way up, like a particular teaching, like the Lamrim teaching can be divided in certain forms. You can talk about the chapter that talks about the perfect human rebirth and the chapter that talks about karma and so forth. It's not like that, because these verses are combined or have been collected into this anthology based on certain separate themes. And as we'll see, they don't proceed in a particularly logical or temporal order from one theme to the next. In fact, sometimes the theme is simply the presence of certain key words that are repeated. Okay. So These chapters have been given titles such as the foolish, that's the 5th chapter, or the wise, that's the 6th chapter, or craving, which is the 24th chapter, happiness, which is the 14th chapter, and so forth. So different ways of selecting these verses have caused them to be collected in these different chapter headings. Oh, and before I continue, I fully intend to open it up for a question and answer session towards the end of our time together. but in the past, when I've made that motivation to do that, the session comes to an end and I've forgotten to put time aside for the question and answer. So I hope when it comes to a point where we're about 15 or 20 minutes before the end, that someone will say, "Hey, John, wake up. It's time for the question and answer session." Because otherwise, it's very, very likely that I will skip over it. Not intentionally, just poor time management on my part. Now, John, I think we can post the selection A, the Dhammapada, and then right after that, we can do selection B, the opening motivation. Thank you, John. So there, what is on the that is being screen shared at this time is basically what I just said, that the Dhammapada is a famous anthology of 383 verses, recording the words Buddha spoke as preserved in the Pali Canon. These verses are divided thematically into 26 brief so-called chapters, averaging approximately 15 verses apiece. The chapters have traditionally been given titles such as the foolish, the wise, craving, happiness, and so forth. And now the opening motivation, we can scroll down to B. So I'm firmly convinced that people who show an interest in the spiritual path, whatever spiritual path that might be, are called to it by some kind of inner force, some inner necessity. And it can take many, many different forms. Sometimes we're turned on by a sight, a painting, a verse, a sunset. Something happens, meeting an extraordinary person, and from these cues, these triggers, an inner impulse to make our life meaningful by following something supramundane, something beyond the ordinary, something that can give our life the meaning that ordinary pursuits, such as wealth, possessions, fame, don't have the ability to give us. And I'd like to refer to that, to those items, those things that spark that interest, as our sources of inspiration. And so for the opening motivation, I'd like us to think about the meaning of these 4 lines. By relying on our profoundest sources of inspiration, calling us to fulfill our highest spiritual potential, may what we think, do, and say now during this present session help bring about true benefit for all beings. If we were to generate this kind of motivation in a very strictly Mahayana Buddhist format, we might simply meditate on the often recited verses calling us to take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, and thereby bring meaning into our life. Enabling us to develop, to achieve enlightenment, to be of maximum benefit to others. Okay. So now we can start turning to the verses that I've selected for the from the Dhammapada for this time together. And though in the advertisement for this course, I said that we would be focusing on the verses from chapter 1, which is true. I will, there are some verses from chapter 1 that I would like us to focus on. The first chapter that I'd like to look at is chapter 14, is from chapter 14. And so that's selection C, which is now on the screen. And the reason I'd like to start with this one is there are many people who do not have any familiarity with the Dhammapada, but they know this verse as well, because this verse is very often quoted in for many to abbreviate the Buddhist teachings in general. So this stanza, in a sense, is a summation of all of Buddha's teachings. Not to do any evil, to cultivate good, to purify one's mind. This is the teaching of the enlightened ones. This is the teaching of the Buddhas. I'm curious, how many people are familiar with this particular verse from other contexts? Actually, now I can't view you. Well, sorry, I confused myself here. Oh, there's the gallery view that I was looking for. Can I see by the people who are on the screen now, by a show of hands, how many people may not be terribly familiar with the Dhammapada as a whole, but are familiar with the 4 lines that I just read, beginning not to do any evil? Can I see by a show of hands? Okay. Because there's many times when in a teaching, these 4 lines are inserted at the beginning to set the tone of the entire teaching. All right. So now we can continue where we were before. So the section C from chapter 14, if we could have that up again. So not to do any evil, to cultivate good, to purify one's mind. This is the teaching of the enlightened ones. And this is, there's a lot of reason why this stanza serves as a summation for the teachings of the Buddha. And one of the reasons is not what it contains, but what it doesn't contain. It doesn't contain admonitions, do this or do that, you know, other than the general terms, don't do evil and cultivate good and purify one's mind. But it doesn't ask us to believe in this or to subscribe to this doctrine or to follow this dogma, or even particularly to pay reverence to the teacher, to the Buddha, to the Dharma, to the Sangha. It just sums what it was that the Buddha taught. So to avoid evil means to avoid giving harm. That's the basis of the Buddhist morality, is to refrain from giving harm. It's not to follow this law or that law or subscribe to this or follow that, but just simply watch one's own behavior of body, speech, and mind, and refrain from doing things that are harmful to oneself, and especially harmful to others. And then what should we do? We should cultivate the good. And the good is, if the evil is what is harmful, then the good is simply what is helpful. Helpful temporarily and helpful ultimately. And then the third line is to purify one's mind. And this indicates that the main emphasis of the Buddhist teachings is to observe the actions of our mind, of our thoughts, of our feelings, of our emotions, because it is the function of these mental attitudes which determine the quality of our life. Mhm. And so there have been people who have wondered, is Buddhism a religion or not? Because it doesn't say here, believe in the Buddha, so it's not based on a belief. It doesn't give a list of things that we used to subscribe to. It's just simply paying attention to the mind, discriminating between the impulses in the mind which are harmful and avoid those, and the impulses which are helpful and to follow those. And a lot of people who are used to having a religion being filled with all kinds of admonitions and strictures on doing this and not doing that, and a whole list of things like that, based on belief or faith, they say, well, this doesn't sound very much like a religion to me. This sounds like a psychology, or maybe a philosophy of life. And I think it's verses like this and the whole tenor of the Buddhist teachings, which is based on the experience of looking into what's going on in our body and our speech and especially in our mind, and then being able to make a discrimination between what's helpful and harmful on those bases, that it's for that reason that there are some people who say, well, Buddhism isn't really a religion. They don't talk about worshiping a god, for example. So it's not quite right to call it a religion. It's something else, a philosophy or a psychology. This reminds me of something that happened to me once when I was visiting a chiropractor who was an Indian gentleman, a Sikh, practicing here in California. Very nice fellow, very top of his profession. And I was in his office one day, and I brought along a Tibetan bag that I had, a jola, if you're familiar with that term. And on this bag, on this jola, there was a picture of the central stupa in Bodh Gaya. I think many of you have visited or heard about the Mahabodhi stupa in Bodh Gaya. And so the doctor, Dr. Singh, looked at the bag, and he saw this picture, and being conversant, being educated Indian, he recognized the stupa for what it was, and he said, "Oh, that's your bag. That's Bodh Gaya." I said, "Yes, I've been to Bodh Gaya many times. I like Bodh Gaya very much." He said, "Oh, Bodh Gaya, where Buddha became enlightened." I see. He said, "Buddhism, yeah." And then he said something which has stayed with me all these years afterwards. He said, "Buddhism, funny religion, no God." Funny religion, no God. He wasn't making fun of it, but he was saying that's kind of strange. Usually in religions, there's a central figure who is worshipped as a god, a creator being. And in fact, the Dalai Lama, when he teaches very often, will say, among the world's religion, there are only a few that are non-theistic. All the rest, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Hinduism, so many of the others, the central focus is on a belief in and worship of a creator God. There are exceptions, but not many. Buddhism is one exception. The Jain religion in India is another. There's one subcategory of the Hindu tradition, the Sankhya, which also is not focused on a creator God, but all the rest are focused on a belief in a creator God who is the author of the moral law and the object of one's faith and devotion. So Dr. Singh, being a Sikh practitioner, he said, "Oh, Buddha's a bit funny in this respect. It's a funny kind of religion. It has no God." As I say, he wasn't being disrespectful. He was just pointing out something which is a bit unusual when you think about it. So what is it that makes Buddhism, this apparently godless religion, what makes it a religion? That's something that we can talk about a bit later. So now I think we're ready to turn to section D. And this begins the twin verses. And most of what follows will be from the twin verses. Now, the title for this chapter, the twin verses, doesn't have anything to do with twins. or pairs. It just has the fact that many times when the Buddha spoke, and you'll find this throughout the sutras, he spoke in a manner which made memorization much easier, in verses which tended to repeat certain sections with slight variations to give deeper meaning. So these twin verses, as you'll see, start with the same two lines in each one. The one on the top, which is verse number 1, and the one on the bottom, which is verse number 2. But the remaining lines, they make a distinction, drawing a difference between what is being explained in the first stanza and what is being explained in the second. So I'll start reading. Our life is shaped by our mind. All that we are is the result of what we have thought. If we speak or act with an impure mind, suffering follows, even as the wheel of a cart follows the foot of the ox that draws it. And then, after that, Buddha went on to say, our life is shaped by our mind. All that we are is the result of what we have thought. If we speak or act with a pure mind, happiness follows, like the shadow that never leaves us. Okay. One of the reasons that I like the Dhammapada a lot, especially verses like this, it's very easy for me to imagine the situation in which these teachings were given. You know, the Buddha, either together with some of his Sangha or alone, would, in his wandering, come into a certain village, go on the alms round to beg for the food for his meal, take it to a certain place and eat it, either separately or with others, and then be requested to give a teaching or spontaneously speak to the people who were there. And it's easy for me to imagine that as the Buddha was trying to explain how the cultivation of the mind is so important, that if we speak or act with a pure mind, happiness follows, but if we speak or act with an impure mind, suffering automatically comes, that he would use the example of things that you would see, even nowadays, in the Indian plains, especially in Bihar, where Bodh Gaya is located, which is one of the most primitive of all of the places in India, where you see ox carts going by, and you can tell by looking at the car that the design hasn't changed in the last 2,500 years. So what you're seeing is pretty much exactly the same as what Buddha would have seen. And to give an idea of just how tied our happiness is to our pure mind, and how tied our suffering is to the activities of an impure mind, it's very easy for me to imagine him seeing a cart, an ox cart passing by, and seeing how the ox is tethered to the cart, that the analogy would spring to mind, that just as the wheels of a cart, follow the foot of the ox that draws it, and everyone there would have that image very clearly in their mind, then in the same way, our life is shaped by our mind, and we are the result of what we've thought, what we felt, our emotional life, and so forth. And in these verses, these separate short verses, a lot is implied, which is explained in much more detail when you get into the sutras, or you start receiving teachings, systematic teachings in the Lamrim, because in those areas, much emphasis is made on our actions, the behavior in which we engage. And the behavior which is the most obvious are the things that we do in our outward actions with our body, and the things that we do with our speech. And most people, when they think of actions, it's these bodily actions or our speech patterns that we're mostly thinking of. But we don't engage in physical behavior. For example, we don't go around hitting people, to take a harmful action to begin with. We don't go around hitting people for no impulse, based on no impulse, based on no reason. Or we don't use harsh language and swear at someone or lie to someone for no reason. All of those negative actions of hitting, stealing, and so forth of the body, and of lying and using divisive speech and other harmful actions of the speech, all of those things don't arise causelessly. They all arise from the previous action of the mind. Now, the actions of the mind can't be seen from the outside. Someone could be smiling at us, but his or her thoughts might be very murderous. So we can't see the inner qualities that are impelling the actions of the person. But we ourselves, if we check up carefully, we can see the impulses even before they give rise to a negative action, and we can interrupt that. So instead of following a negative impulse and engaging in a harmful action, we can exercise restraint. I'll have more to say about that a little bit later, in a later verse from chapter 1. But now let's look at section E, which is a continuation from the verses from chapter 1. Okay. Now this reads, there are some who, full of pride for having memorized the words of many spiritual teachings, have nevertheless neglected to put them into practice. Such heedless persons are like the foolish cowherd who, counting the cows belonging to someone else, mistakenly believes he himself is wealthy. Such heedless persons receive no share in the fruits of the spiritual life. And we can see from this stanza again, an example used from the agrarian culture of the India of 2,000 years ago, taking as an example a cowherd who doesn't really own many cows himself, but he counts the cows that belong to someone else as if they were his own. And so from that kind of example, the Buddha says, someone who is full of the pride of his so-called spiritual learning, because he's memorized a lot of verses or texts or so forth, but has neglected to put them into practice, such a person receives no share from the fruits of the spiritual life. In contrast, and now this is verse 20 below it, there are those who, although they have not memorized many words, have been able to put the teachings they've received into practice and have freed themselves from the faults of desirous attachment, hatred, and ignorance, thereby sharing fully in the fruits of the spiritual life. And I've heard my main teacher, Lama Yeshe, say on many occasions words very much to this effect. In fact, I'm a bit embarrassed to admit it, but very often he was addressing me specifically when he was thinking of someone who knows a lot of words of the teachings, because that was my speciality when I was Lama's student. I kind of worked on editing the words of a number of texts and even memorized whole sections of those teachings that I helped edit. But Lama would make me aware, as if I wasn't already aware, that even though I know a lot of words, I've been very, very lax in putting them into practice. And so on many occasions, Lama would make fun of me for having a great treasury of words, but kind of an empty treasury of realization. So this verse from the Buddha certainly speaks to me, and probably speaks to many others as well. And in that second stanza, the verse 20, notice the second to the last line, have freed themselves from the faults, and here is the line I mean, the faults of desirous attachment, hatred, and ignorance. I want to pause here and ask a question. I don't mean to put anyone on the spot, so I'll just ask this generally, so maybe we can have the gallery view back again. Okay. So this phrase, desirous attachment, hatred, and ignorance, those three faults, by raising your hand, because I don't need to put anybody on the spot. I'll only call on you if you wish to participate. What do those words remind you of anything very specific in terms of the Buddha's teachings? Desirous attachment, hatred, and ignorance. So if you raise your hand or indicate, I'll call on you. Is it Laura?
The three poisons.
The three poisons. And could you say a little bit more about the three poisons for people who might not be that familiar with that?
Well, they're the root of the Dharma teachings, really, is to understand the three poisons as a very important understanding that Buddhism really is understanding how important these three poisons are to embrace them and to practice the meaning of what.
Exactly. And you know, or do you remember, there is a visual diagram
Yeah.
in which these three poisons have a central place. Do you want to say a word or two about that?
The dependent arising, the diagram of a dependent arising.
Yeah, sometimes called the wheel of life.
Wheel
Yeah.
of life.
Yeah.
And these, they're depicted with these symbols. The rooster, the snake, and the pig
Right.
are associated with the three poisons in the middle of that diagram of the wheel of life.
Right.
And I think that's generally interesting because it's the focal point.
Yes. Mhm.
And from a visual point, it's helpful.
Yes. And in some diagrams, those three animals are depicted somewhat differently in different artistic traditions. But His Holiness the Dalai Lama says the most proper way of depicting those three animals is to have the rooster and the snake emerging from the mouth of the pig. In other diagrams, the three form a circle among themselves.
Mhm.
But the rooster being symbolic of desirous attachment, and the snake being symbolic of anger, are derived from the pig, which in this case is symbolic of ignorance. So this, just that much itself, only that, and put aside all the other much more detailed teachings that could be given about the wheel of life, just that is extremely informative, because here ignorance means a misunderstanding of the nature of reality. And so both our desires, attachment, and our anger and hatred, they don't arise for no reason or for no cause, but they indicate that our vision of reality itself is somehow mistaken. It's somehow wrong. So, for example, what might cause anger to arise? Well, speaking personally, in front of other people, I don't get angry very much, but when I'm driving my car and someone cuts me off in traffic or does something stupid, I often, before I check myself, I find myself swearing or yelling, right? So what caused that anger to arise? Well, according to the Buddhist teachings, it's because I'm misunderstanding the nature of reality, but that doesn't appear to be the case. I mean, I'm driving along, I'm staying on my side of the road. I notice someone doing something stupid or dangerous, and that's what caused my anger to rise. There was no mistaking the nature of reality. I saw it very clearly, didn't I? Or did I? It seemed like I was seeing things particularly clearly, seeing a person doing something dangerous, making a serious driving mistake, and my anger came from that. So the ignorance here doesn't have to do with such mundane, general aspects of misunderstanding the nature of something. It's much deeper than that. Does anyone want to add a sentence or two to that before we move on? What is the mistaken nature of reality that would cause someone to get angry when he sees someone doing something dangerous on the road. I see a hand, but is that you, John? I couldn't quite see. Yeah, do you want to? Do you have a microphone? I'm sorry, I'm not getting the sound.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Now I can hear something.
It seems like it has something to do about that you expect that that is not correct. You expect, you know, this other person to be behaving in the way that you would like him to behave. Maybe.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. That's certainly part of it. But for example, when you see someone doing something wrong, there are ways of pointing it out or noting it. But I'm talking about when this causes the delusion of anger or hatred to arise in your mind. Every time you see someone do something that's mistaken, you necessarily react with anger or hatred. Like when a parent sees a child doing something wrong, especially if it's a very young child and it's trying to educate the child, there's ways of correcting or pointing that out without getting angry. You know, because you love the child, you try not to express anger towards her. You have certain understanding, but there are other times when someone does something wrong. It might even be a rather minor thing, but if it interferes with your own ideas of how things should be, then this anger or this hatred can arise. Yes, Yolanda.
So would it be craving, which
Yes.
is craving something different and rejecting what is actually happening? This is the way I would look at it.
No, that's really getting towards the very center of that issue, having to do with craving.
Yeah.
In other words, it's not just simply wanting something. It's one has a very solid, concrete image of what things should be or shouldn't be.
Yeah.
And if something goes against that, it's like it's an insult, an insult to the way you view reality. Here, I can go back to the rage that can rise very easily when we're driving and we see someone do something wrong. Like I'll omit all the swear words here, but on those occasions, I might yell out. Nobody can hear me. That's why I feel confident in yelling. I yell out, "You stupid, you stupid SOB," right? You stupid. So like at that point, to my mind, that person didn't simply make a mistake. He or she was stupid. In other words, there's a certain bad quality that that person has, which impelled him to engage in that behavior. So that badness, that stupidity, appeared to be a part and parcel, a central element in that person's makeup. Now, of course, I've never met that person, right? But just by judging on that action, I call him stupid. But he may not be stupid. That may not be the situation at all. For example, the first time I really noticed how virulent that delusion was in myself of getting so angry when I was driving was an occasion when I was passing through the roads connecting where I live to San Francisco during rush hour. Now, usually I have no reason to drive during rush hour because I don't have any job that I'm going to or anything. But on this occasion, I was passing through these big, heavily trafficked freeways in the vicinity of San Francisco. And during that, you know, the roads, all the lanes were very crowded, and this person in front of me, trying to gain a little bit of advantage, to get a little bit further on, he turned into my lane without thinking to turn on his directional. So it came as a shock that he suddenly did that. So my immediate reaction was, what a stupid thing to do, right? So in that time, if someone had given me the ability to draw a picture of what I thought that person would look like, I would have drawn a very ugly, stupid looking person, right? Because that's how he or she, I don't know to this day whether it was a man or a woman, appeared to, in my mind's eye, as a very kind of ugly, stupid person for doing that. And then I suddenly started to realize, you know, I never have to travel these highways during rush hour. That person and all the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of other people that I'm seeing before me and in my rearview mirror, they probably have to travel through rush hours like this in both the morning and the evening, 5 days a week for years. And it's so difficult to do even once occasionally, and these people have to do it all the time. So they're not stupid, they're not crazy, they're not ugly, they're just frustrated. They're frustrated because they live a life which compels them to be in this midst of such amount of traffic. And just that thought made me think, well, I should give them a break, you know.
That would be a compassion.
It would be a compassionate thing to give
Yeah.
them a break, you know. Maybe a gentle reminder sometime later, put on your directional before you change the lane, maybe that be appropriate. But getting angry, what is anger based on? It's based on the concept I have in my own mind that people that do things like that are inherently stupid or ugly or crazy or disrespectful. And it may be the case that none of that is true. So ignorance is holding on to certain qualities as if they had a certain inherent existence without taking into account any of the circumstances that may have caused that behavior. And then when we take those circumstances into account, then as Yolanda said, the proper response is compassion, not anger, not hatred. And on top of all of that, when we do get angry like that, when I do get angry like that, the only person who suffers from it is me. You know, my blood pressure rises a bit, I get red in the face, maybe I myself get distracted and do something stupid in my own driving. So for all of those reasons, the snake of anger and the and the rooster of desirous attachment, they arise from the ignorance which mistakes the nature of reality, sees things as if they had inherent nature. Okay. So how are we doing in time? We still have time, don't we? Okay, do we have time for another verse before the end? Oh yeah. This is a good one. As if some were good and some were bad. This one I say is good because I particularly like this one. And it follows very closely upon what we've been talking about. So, and you'll see again the repetition, which is common among the Buddhist teachings, making it easier to memorize. They abused me. They beat me. They defeated me. They robbed me. Those who dwell on such thoughts will never be free from hatred. They abused me. They beat me. They defeated me. They robbed me. They cut me off in traffic. Those who do not dwell on such thoughts will surely become free from hatred. For in this world, hatreds never cease through hatred, through the opposite of hatred, through non-hatred or through love, through metta. Through the opposite of hatred alone do they cease. This is an eternal law. Before I get to that last verse, number 6, just stay on 5 for a while. In this world, hatreds never cease through hatred. We see this, don't we, on every level of behavior, whether it's the personal contact between two people or quarrels between nations. When one person or one nation feels shortchanged or abused, it's so common in this world that out of the hatred that they think they're the object of, they return that hatred with more hatred. And all that leaves, it's like Gandhi's saying, he was thinking about the phrase, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And his commentary on that, he says, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, in other words, doing something harmful for harm that we've received, leads to a world in which everyone has no teeth and are blind. Right? So through this world, the hatreds that are directed towards us are never overcome by directing hatred back at the other person. The only way hatred is overcome is through its opposite, through non-hatred, through non-harming, through love, through loving kindness, through metta. And the Buddha's cap to that was, this is an eternal law. In other words, this is always true. One story of Buddha that I like very much, and which I had the fortunate ability to be able to write a children's book about it, contained, it was about the life of the Buddha, called Prince Siddhartha. And in one chapter, it describes an elephant which had been maddened, had been beaten, and then set loose so that it would trample the Buddha, who was coming into the village at that time. And as this maddened elephant raced towards the Buddha, the followers that were with the Buddha left out of fear of being trampled, all except for Ananda, the Buddha's cousin and closest attendants, who held on to the Buddha's robe and hid behind him. But the Buddha himself expressed no hatred or no fear towards this obviously crazed elephant, and instead developed compassion, realizing the only reason the elephant is acting this way is because it had been beaten and was now crazed with anger. And so instead of viewing the elephant as an enemy, as an object of hatred, the Buddha viewed him as an object of his compassion, of his loving kindness. And so the Buddha sent out rays of his kindness and his compassion towards the elephant. And as the elephant grew nearer, it grew calm. It lost its hatred, it lost its anger, it lost its fear, and eventually bowed down at the feet of the Buddha, who was able to pat it the same way you would pat a dog who's come and is kneeling at your feet. Now, this was a very, very famous event that happened, and it was viewed by many people during the life of the Buddha. And there were other similar events as well. So this wasn't just some kind of made-up story. This is what actually happened, and it was viewed and it was witnessed that way. And it would be on an occasion like this that the Buddha would point out to this pacified elephant, and say to Ananda and whoever else was around him, in this world, hatreds, anger, fear never cease through hatred. It's only through the opposite, loving kindness and compassion, that they cease. This is an eternal law. So now if we go back to the first and second verses above that, where the examples are being abused, being beaten, being defeated, being robbed, the Buddha says, those who dwell on such thoughts will never be free from hatred. Whereas those who do not dwell on such thoughts will surely become free from hatred. Now, the Buddha is not saying, for example, let's take the example of someone who robbed you or is trying to rob you. The Buddha is not saying, don't think that they robbed you, or don't think that they tried to rob you, because in reality, the person was trying to rob you. Okay, so the Buddha is not saying turn a blind eye to it or pretend you don't see it. He's not saying that. There is a conventional level of reality in which certain things happening, and he's not asking us to ignore that. He's just asking us to ignore the interpretation we make if someone is robbing us or defeating us some way or beating us or abusing us. Our interpretation that that person is therefore an evil person who is evil, harmful from his or her own side, and that quality of evil is an inherent quality of that person, that is the mistake. That is what we have to give up. So if we just dwell on the harm that was done, it's very easy to fall into the mistake of thinking that the person himself or herself is an evil person, as opposed to thinking it's a person who, due to the vicissitudes of life, is engaging in harmful behavior, but in whose deeper quality, deeper nature, those qualities don't exist, but instead is somehow or other has been abused himself or herself and is acting uh, uh, not out of the evilness of nature, but because of the pressures of life. And if we understand the pressures of life that we're all uh, uh, subject to, then we don't have to dwell on the abuse or the harm. We can instead generate understanding, leading to loving kindness and compassion. Okay. Now, talking about the quarrels, whether it's the quarrels between two people or the quarrels between two nations, Buddha had this to say. These are the final two verses of the final verses of number 6. People forget that their lives will end soon. For those who remember, in other words, those who keep in mind that death will come at any time, that their lives will end soon, then quarrels come to an end. If we were to keep in mind how short our life is, how we could die at any time, then many, if not all of the things that disturb us, that cause us to have quarrels between ourselves or others, between our side and the other side, between any two groups of people or nations, those quarrels would come to an end. Do you think that's true? Instead of my commenting more on this one, I'm going to throw this open to the gallery. What do you think? If we keep the imminence of death in mind, you know, that we're going to die and that this death may come soon, will that stop us having quarrels? Is that a natural outgrowth of that, if we were to keep it in mind? Can I see the gallery view? Maybe someone wants to join in on this, either agreeing with it or disagreeing with it or explaining why it's true. I think I need to see the gallery view, so the verses have to be taken down now. Section F. Thank you. So anyone want to comment on it? Yolanda, I'll get back to you in a second, but I want to hear from someone else. Stella, are you raising your hand? I can't quite see. Okay. You're
Okay, can you hear me now?
now I can. Thank you, dear.
So I'm reminded in this last verse of several different things. Number one
Yeah.
is patience that we have to develop. Another one is reminding ourselves of that death will come. That's like, if we don't remember that death will come, that's ignorance, you know. So we have to keep that in mind. And also karma. Is it our karma that these people are abusing us? Maybe we abused them in the past, you know. So if we have to take all those things into account.
That's very true, and pointing out that the antidote to all the delusions is wisdom, but the antidote specifically to anger is the practice of patience for all of the reasons that Stella just mentioned. Uh, Patience allows us to view the harm we received as our own, the ripening of our own karma, for example. And if it's our own karma that's caused us to receive the harm, then who should we get angry at? We shouldn't get angry at the other person. We should either get angry at ourselves, or more directly, get angry at our anger, because that's what was causing the harm in the beginning. It wasn't the other person from his own side or her own side who decided to abuse us, to rob us, to hurt us. It was what we ourselves did. So there's no reason, there's no logical reason to get angry at the other person. But the other part of it, so I think what Stella's pointing out, bringing in the practice of patience, is very, very central to this. My specific question was, but how does remembering death help?
What? Remembering death.
How does remembering that death may come at any time help us stop our anger, our hatred, or avoid it? Yeah,
It's Eloise.
Eloise,
Sometimes it doesn't.
yeah. Sometimes
I mean, I think of family feuds that go on for generation after generation after generation. And they know they're gonna die, and they know they're gonna die, but they're certain that their kids will carry on the feud. So, you know, in some cases of just really off the wall anger, it doesn't matter. You know, they buy into that anger, and it's not gonna stop just because they're gonna die.
Yeah, yeah. So in that case, the anger, the hatred is so virulent. It has taken on a particular flavor of abysmal ignorance, thinking that, okay, maybe I'm going to die, but I have other people who can carry on the fight, and that'll show them. That'll get those guys. You know, I mean, that's abysmal ignorance, isn't it? It's ignorance piled on top of ignorance, right? One way that I tend to view it is simply that if you're facing your own death, you know, it's not just an intellectual idea you have, oh, I'll die someday. And people say that they don't really believe it in their heart, but they're actually approaching death. In other words, they see the dissolution happening. They see that the present life is coming to an end. What kind of relief could they possibly receive from dying with insults to the other person, with words of hatred to the other person on your dying breath? There'd be no satisfaction from that.
No.
There's a line in a poem that was written, I think, towards the end of World War I, and it was about a person from one side, I think on the British side, facing a soldier, a German soldier on the other side, and so they're enemies. They've been shooting at each other, you know, and now they're face to face, and one of them is dying. And in that poem, the British soldier reports about the German soldier, which up to this point has been his worst enemy, not personally, but The one he was trying to kill with his rifle was trying to kill him with his other rifle. At that point, he reports about that enemy soldier. He waved and kissed his hand to me and died. In other words, knowing that death wasn't a year away or a month away or a week away, but was now a few seconds away, the only way he could die was to blow him a kiss, and then he died. And I think there's a real deep truth to that, don't you? You know, that when we're really face to face, not just as an intellectual idea, but with the fact that we are coming to an end, where is the energy
Right.
to be full of hatred? Right? Anyway, let me now, because as I said in the beginning, this is something I often mistake. Let's do a time check to see where we are. Okay, according to me, it's just about 7 o'clock here, which means it must be just about 8 o'clock where you are, right?
Yeah.
But we did start a good 10 or 15 minutes late, didn't we?
Yeah.
Right? So if people do have to leave because you have obligations, that's fine. That's very understood. But if you don't mind, or would like to stay on, then I would be very happy to stay with you till that would be like 8:15 your time, let's say. And then at that time, then I can read the concluding dedication prayers. So this is now open to comments or questions. Anything that you'd like to say during this ending time. And Yolanda.
Jonathan, thank you. I like to back up a little bit to the question, is Buddhism religion or what?
Yeah.
And it makes me think about the comment His Holiness Dalai Lama made, and I'm sorry I don't remember the reference, but it's stuck in my mind because it's such a perfectly logical. Someone asked a question of His Holiness, and according to the text I read, with his innocent like smile, he says, it's a path to enlightenment. It's path to enlightenment. And to me, it's just such a perfectly logical, because the teachings connect to every aspect of human being, psychology, philosophy, biology,
Exactly.
everything. And those of us who meet the Dharma, we focus on depending on our own personal orientation, but Dharma includes all of those aspects. So it's a path including every one of those.
Thank you, Yolanda. That's a very, very lovely answer, very inclusive answer. I appreciate it very much.
I just love that. Thank you.
Yeah. By the way, I hear a bell. Do you hear a bell?
Somebody's alarm is on.
Oh, okay. One small thing to add to what Yolanda said, that wonderful quotation from the Dalai Lama, is the word religion commonly focuses on belief, on faith, and commonly in the world on a creator deity, right? But religion means to bind again, to rejoin, like legation. We bind. And so there's an idea that what true religion does is it joins that which has become separate or that which has become weakened. So from this point of view, you could think, well, we have, according to the Buddhist teachings, and at the deepest level of our being, we all have in the enlightened quality, the enlightened potential, the Buddha nature, the ability to live our life on a completely different level than the one that we're leading while under the force of the three poisons. Okay? So that, we could say, is our true nature. So ordinary beings have become separated from their true nature. Occasionally, some aspects of it will arise, but then we fall into the faults of the delusions, the afflictions, the hatred, the jealousies, and so forth. And so from this point of view, religion is anything which brings us back into close connection with our deepest nature, our truest nature, which is as a being whose basic quality is not the snake of anger, or the rooster of desirous attachment, or the pig of ignorance, but whose deepest nature is the radiance of sunshine, the radiance of enlightenment. That's who, on the deepest level, we are. Or to put it another way, that is the what we can become, because we have that potential already. So if we look at religion as something which binds us, I can't pronounce the Latin very well, but means again, and the G, negation, means to bind again. So if we look at religion as what binds us to our true nature, then of course Buddhism is a religion. It's not a religion in the sense that it's based on beliefs and so forth, but it's a religion because it posits that we do have this true nature, this deepest nature, which has the quality of radiance, has the quality of kindness and compassion and wisdom. And this is what we can connect to. This is our ultimate destiny. Okay. So we have another 10 or 11 minutes. Anything else people want to share or ask questions about or make comments on? If not, there's something I can add, but I've done a lot of speaking here, and I would like to open it to you if there's something you really want to say.
I want to say something about the dying thing.
Thank you, Pemane. And by the way, hello. So nice to
Hi.
see you again.
Hi, Jonathan.
After such a long time.
Yeah. I mean, okay, so what was I? So this dying thing, Eloise was saying that, sometimes it's not the case that, and you were saying that that's just this ignorance just stacked on top of ignorance, like this insane ignorance. But one of the things I think is really difficult for a lot of people, especially in more Western cultures, to understand, to really think about dying, and really, or any culture, actually it could be, but maybe more in Western cultures, to really realize that we're going to die. Because like you said, you can intellectually say, yeah, well, I know I'm going to die, But to have that real deep realization that I could die any moment, and what's important, and let's get rid of all the stuff that's not, that's just pointless. Part of that, I think, is because we're just so removed from death. We never see it.
Yeah.
We hear about it, but we don't. We're just. It's like this. It's like this separated thing now. Somebody dies and their body's taken away and cremated.
Right.
You didn't get to
Right.
see them dead. You weren't with them. You didn't get a chance to, especially since COVID. Like people dying in hospitals, and you weren't allowed to go, and you couldn't do, all of these terrible things. So I think that's a big part of the difficulty in realizing that we're really going to die, unless you take the time to meditate on dying, and I just find that fascinating. I don't think I've told you, but I've become an end of life doula. So I haven't actually had any clients per se. I mean, I've been with some people who are dying, friends, but it's just this thing that I think about all the time. But I know for myself that I still haven't fully realized that I'm going to die. It's still an intellectual thing for me most of the time, unless I'm by the bedside of somebody who's taking their last breath. Then it's a more like, wow, okay, this has happened, and it's going to happen to all of us. But then it fades away again. It's an interesting thing. So I just think it's an important part of practice, basically, is what I'm trying to say.
Well,
Meditate on dying.
No, that's wonderful what you say, Pamela, and wonderful that you're doing that. That's such valuable work, and all the things that have been said reminds me of stories I've heard, some personal that have been told to me, and others that I've just read about, people who have had a near-death experience. So it's not somebody else, it's not something they read about, but they approached their own death. But for one reason or other, they didn't die. And one of the things that we hear again and again from people who've had that experience is, oh, I thought I was going to die. Oh, thank goodness, I'm not going to die. So I'm going to change my life from now on. I'm not going to worry about the small stuff, and it's all small stuff. And so you hear that, people say that, but as Pimana said, it's very easy for that realization, if it's not grounded on continual, meditation or understanding, it's very easy for that to fade away after a while. And the determination to change their life around can fade. But sometimes it really happens. Person comes face to face with death, and they have a personality change after that. They really recognize quarrels aren't worth it. Anger's not worth it. Desirous attachment's not worth it. So it is possible to happen. But yes, just approaching it intellectually or from a distance, or especially in a culture where we don't see death up close that often, compared with some other cultures anyway, is often not enough. Thank you.
So, John, I have a little couple thoughts I wanted to share.
Okay.
One was about.
Is that Joe? Is that
Yeah.
your name? Yeah. Thank you, Joe.
It's Joe. Sometimes when anger arises, it's actually fear underneath the anger.
Exactly.
So, you mentioned the person cutting you off in traffic.
Yeah.
Well, that's a threat.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what underlies a lot of my anger reactions. Is underneath it is actually fear.
Yeah.
that my little bubble is threatened with
Yes.
being popped, and so there's that. And then also, you talked about contemplation of death as a possible antidote to anger.
Mhm.
And one way that can be an antidote to anger is realizing that not only am I going to die, but this person that I'm angry at
Yes.
is going to die.
Yeah.
And that we're all just these fragile, temporary beings. And so that might give rise to compassion for the person that you're angry at.
I think
So
that's very true.
Yeah.
I think that's true. And that is in the commentaries to these verses, that is pointed out as well. Oneself and others, we're both going to die. So what's the use of getting into this embroilment? Now, I should add a little footnote, an asterisk, to the fear that we have on that deep level, that fear of death that maybe causes us to get angry when someone's doing something dangerous on the road. And we think, oh, they could smash into me. There's two kinds of fear. There's a completely unreasonable fear, which is based on ignorance and all its mistaken attitudes. But there's also a reasonable fear. In other words, if there's a lot of traffic going by and you're on foot, what keeps you from running out into the middle of the street? Let's say something rolls out into the street, a ball, for instance, and you intuitively think, oh, to run after it. But then you look at the cars coming and you stop. Well, that's a reasonable fear. It's reasonable to assume that if you were to run out into the street at that time, you'd be run over. So that's not a over-the-top, completely mistaken, ignorant-based fear. That's an understanding of the conventional nature of such things as streets, automobiles, and your own perishable body. And you don't want them all to come together because you would just be wasting this precious human life. But when fear is something that paralyzes you, that makes your actions to things so exaggerated that they're no longer in accordance with any level of reality, certainly neither the conventional or the ultimate level, then that's getting into a delusion. Okay.
Hello,
Yeah. I hear something.
we might be out of time, I don't know, but the two things I wanted to, first of all,
Yes.
just say this is so wonderful. I hope you will come back and we could do this a little bit more.
Well, that's very sweet of you to suggest.
And I'd like to keep that as a possibility if we could. I know you're busy moving and things like that, but the other thing is I struck sometimes with my impatience, which I often like to think I don't have too much of it, but I do. And that I'm realizing that's closely related to anger.
Yeah.
Just wishing I had some tools, maybe breathing, taking a deep breath or something. But sometimes I'm in the middle of something that seems kind of intense and I can't just leave it and go like take a walk outside or something. So I'm just wondering if you have ideas about working with that impatience?
Well, that is a very, very vast and very important question to address. And the very, very short answer is what you yourself said, breathing. Often, anger causes a clutching of the breath. This is not something controlled by our mind. It's kind of, at least not our conscious mind. It's a clutching. And if we can feel that and kind of, if there's a space to breathe into it and dissipate it with the out breath, dissolve it with the in breath and dissipate it with the out breath, then the more we can do that, assuming that's available to us, the less strong the anger becomes, the more the anger itself can start to dissipate. But beyond that, the teachings on dealing with anger, the teachings about patience and so forth, they have many, many different techniques, and that's something that can be taught at the center and also is found in many Dharma books. The 6th chapter of Shantideva's Bodhisattva Charya Avatara, the 6th chapter is all about that. Yeah. And by the way, the person who asked that question, I couldn't see anyone, so I don't know the name of who asked that. Very good question.
Mary Jo Whiteman. I'm at the City Garba Center right now.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
Mary Jo?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mary Jo. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, from my side, I'm happy to stay longer, but you have already extended your stay a lot. I just wanted to say one thing as a tease concerning the Dhammapada, and then we'll do their final dedication. There's so many excellent translations, some very poetic, of the Dhammapada, and it is said that these verses are very often tied to actual events that took place in the Buddha's life. That something happened, and then he commented on what was happening like he summed it up with a certain verse. Now, I used the example, which I'm not sure is a completely legitimate example, that the verse of only love overcomes hatred, as something the Buddha said. He certainly said it on occasions in which love showed that it overcome hatred, but I used it specifically in the example of when the enraged elephant's anger was dissipated by the love of the Buddha. But in this issue, this volume of the Dhammapada that I have, they give particular instances of specific things that happened that Buddha remarked upon. And that is very, very, very instructive to see how Buddha was able to respond spontaneously with these beautiful verses that summed up an experience that everyone had just witnessed. And maybe sometime in the future I can go over a few of these. I have outlined one or two, but I don't want to keep you here too much longer. But I can't resist this one because because one of the characters is a spirit. It's nice to hear stories about spirits. So the verse that this refers to is about controlling anger. And on one occasion, the Buddha said, whoever checks his anger as it's arising, so as it's risen, whoever checks it is ever able to stop it, as though it were a rolling chariot, a chariot that has cut loose and is now rolling down the hill. Him I call a true charioteer. In other words, he's using the case of someone who sees that there's a kind of a runaway chariot and is able to stop it, to check it while it's running away. The Buddha says that person is a real charioteer, meaning he's a real practitioner. Other people who are called chariots because they can just drive a vehicle like that, they're just someone who's merely holding on the reins. So the event that caused Buddha to say that was this one. He said, there was a monk who, while he was cutting down a tree to make a lodging for himself, accidentally injured the offspring of a tree spirit. Right? So the tree spirit grew very angry at this and wanted to kill the monk. But on later reflection, she controlled her uprisen anger. And she reported the whole matter to the Buddha, who praised her and uttered this verse. He who checks his uprisen anger is someone I call a true charioteer, a true practitioner. Others are merely people who hold on to the reins of horses. So that's giving a very strong sense that while the rising of anger is a negativity, the ability to check it is extremely positive. And there are many teachings by the Buddha in which he talks about avoiding negativity that has not yet arisen and reversing the negativity that has already arisen. And both of these are extremely virtuous, are signs of practicing the spiritual path. Okay. So that's it for now. Thank you for attending. And the last thing I'll do is just simply read the verses of this concluding dedication. So bring to mind that nowhere within the three spheres of the dedication, that is, the three spheres, that's referring in this case to oneself, who has made the dedication, to what one is dedicating for, like when we say a long life, and then the act of dedication itself, the words we use to express it, that nowhere in these three spheres is there even one atom of concrete self-existence, of inherent existence. So keeping that in mind, we dedicate all the positive, meritorious energy and whatever insight we may have generated through this practice, in other words, through this joint activity that we just engaged in, so that all beings may be freed from their mental and physical suffering. So that His Holiness the Dalai Lama, Khepje Zopa Rinpoche, and all spiritual friends of all traditions, revealing true paths to happiness, higher rebirth, liberation, and full enlightenment, may be endowed with long, fruitful lives. And so that we may come under the benevolent care of such compassionate gurus in this and in all future states of existence. And so that the Buddhas pervading every corner of the universe may continue to turn the peerless wheel of the Dharma, and so that we may attain full enlightenment as swiftly as possible In other words, that we may fulfill our enlightened potential as swiftly as possible in order to repay the infinite kindness we have received from each and every sentient being. Okay. So, thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for your participation, whether you spoke or just thought. And it has been a pleasure being able to spend this time with you.
Thank you, John.
Thank you
you,
so
John.
much, John.
Thank you.
That was really
Thank
wonderful.
you.
John.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, John.